The chamber was electric that evening, cameras capturing every glance, every whisper. Senator Ted Cruz leaned into his microphone with that sharp, deliberate tone he's known for. "Ms. Crockett," he began, cutting across her words, "let me stop you right there." Jasmine Crockett barely blinked. She smiled politely, adjusted her notes, and continued speaking. But Cruz wasn't finished. Again, and again, he tried to interrupt, 6 times in total. Each time he raised his voice, she calmly reclaimed the floor, her composure unshaken. By the 4th interruption, murmurs spread through the room. Viewers at home could sense the tension, one side attempting to dominate, the other refusing to yield. By the 6th, it was clear Cruz was determined to silence her. But Crockett had been patient long enough. She leaned into her mic, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "Senator," she said, locking eyes with him, "if you spent half as much energy listening as you do interrupting, you might actually learn something worth repeating on television." The chamber froze. Reporters' pens stopped. Even Cruz looked momentarily stunned, his usual retorts caught in his throat. The crowd's reaction was instant, half gasps, half applause. Crockett had waited, measured every interruption, and delivered her clapback like a final strike. Cruz, visibly rattled, muttered something under his breath, but it was too late. The viral clip was sealed in that moment, Jasmine Crockett, unshaken, shutting down interruption after interruption until her last line ended the exchange instantly. Ted Cruz shifted in his chair, clearly unsettled by the reaction. His attempt to control the exchange had backfired. The cameras zoomed in, catching his tight jaw and forced smile. He leaned forward once again, trying to recover the upper hand. "Ms. Crockett, with all due respect," he began, emphasizing the phrase as though it were a weapon, "this committee isn't about grandstanding. It's about facts. And you seem more interested in sound bites than substance." But Crockett didn't flinch. She folded her hands neatly on the desk and tilted her head just slightly, the way a teacher might when a student gives an unconvincing answer. "Senator," she replied evenly, "facts are exactly what I've been providing. What you call the grandstanding is simply me refusing to let you rewrite the record while millions of people are watching." Gasps echoed through the chamber again, with a few stifled chuckles rippling from the audience. Cruz's face darkened. He hadn't expected her to fire back so quickly, and with such precision. The tension was mounting, and everyone knew it, this wasn't just another hearing. It was a showdown, and Crockett was holding her ground with every word. Cruz leaned back in his chair, forcing a chuckle that sounded more nervous than confident. He tapped his pen on the desk, trying to project control. "So you're saying I'm rewriting the record?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's quite an accusation for someone who hasn't even addressed the core issue." Crockett leaned forward now, her tone still calm but unmistakably firm. "What I'm saying, Senator, is that every time I try to lay out the facts, you cut me off. The public doesn't want interruptions, they want answers. And if you're afraid of those answers, maybe that says more about you than it does about me." The audience erupted, some with applause, others with hushed whispers. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. Cruz's smile tightened further, his frustration thinly veiled. For the first time that evening, he hesitated before speaking again. That pause alone was a victory for Crockett, and everyone in the room felt it. Cruz finally leaned back into the microphone, his tone sharpening. "Representative Crockett, with all due respect, this isn't your courtroom. This is the Senate. And here, we follow order, not theatrics." The jab was meant to sting, but Crockett didn't miss a beat. She sat taller in her chair, her voice cutting through the room like glass. "Order, Senator." Interesting choice of words. Because order requires discipline, and discipline requires respect. 6 times you've interrupted me, and each time, the only disorder here has come from your chair. The chamber went silent for a moment before a wave of murmurs swelled. Some senators shifted uncomfortably, while others smirked at Cruz's sudden stillness. The clip was already circulating live on social media: Crockett's poised retort, Cruz's frozen expression. He shuffled his notes, desperate to regroup. But Crockett wasn't done. She leaned slightly forward, her eyes locked on him. "If we're going to talk about facts, Senator, then let's actually do it. Otherwise, this is nothing more than theater, and you've already taken center stage." The tension was now unbearable. Viewers at home could feel it. Cruz was on the ropes, and Crockett was just getting started. Cruz's pen tapped louder now, each click echoing in the chamber. His face tightened, but he forced another smile. "Well," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm, "if you're finished lecturing the Senate on respect, maybe you'll actually answer the question I asked." Crockett tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into the faintest smirk. She didn't rush. She didn't flinch. She let the silence hang for just long enough before replying. "Senator," she said slowly, "you've asked no fewer than 3 different questions, none of which you let me finish answering. If you really want clarity, here's a suggestion: stop interrupting and listen for once." The words landed like a hammer. The audience broke into sudden, unrestrained applause, forcing the moderator to bang the gavel for order. Cameras zoomed in on Cruz, whose face flushed as he tried to hide his irritation. Crockett didn't move, her expression cool and unshaken, as if she had rehearsed this very moment 100 times. In truth, she hadn't needed to rehearse, this was simply her refusing to be steamrolled. Cruz glanced around, realizing the crowd wasn't with him anymore. For the first time, it looked like he was the one losing ground in his own chamber. Cruz leaned forward again, his voice rising now, sharper and more desperate. "Representative Crockett, this is my time, not yours. You don't get to come in here and grandstand like you're running the show. This is the Senate, and you will answer the question I asked." Gasps rippled through the chamber. The tone was no longer calculated, it was a flash of frustration. Cameras caught every second of his raised voice, every flicker of impatience in his expression. Crockett, however, remained still. She folded her hands, glanced briefly toward the chair, and then turned back to Cruz with piercing calm. "Senator," she began, her tone measured, 6 times you've tried to cut me off. 6 times you've tried to silence me. But let me make this very clear, you don't control my voice, and you certainly don't control the truth." The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the chamber was locked on her. Cruz opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. And then, applause. Stronger this time, echoing around the room. Reporters could hardly keep up as tweets and headlines were already drafting themselves: Crockett stands tall. Cruz silenced, The fight wasn't over, but everyone knew the balance of power had just shifted. Cruz adjusted his tie, clearly rattled but unwilling to admit defeat. He leaned into the mic, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. "Well, Representative, if you're finished with your speech, maybe the American people can finally hear something of substance. Because I'll remind you, this isn't about your voice, it's about accountability." The words sounded sharp on paper, but in the chamber they rang hollow. His tone betrayed irritation more than authority. Viewers at home could sense it. Cruz was scrambling. Crockett seized the opening. She straightened in her chair, her voice steady but cutting with precision. "Accountability, Senator. That's exactly what I'm here for. But accountability requires honesty. And honesty requires that you stop twisting questions into soundbites for your next TV hit." A low rumble of laughter spread through the audience, the kind that carried more sting than applause. Cruz's face stiffened, his eyes darting toward the cameras as if realizing every second of this exchange was being broadcast unfiltered. Crockett didn't blink. "You wanted accountability? Then sit back and let me give the facts. Otherwise, what you're really afraid of is that the truth doesn't fit your narrative." The blow landed harder than any before. The chamber erupted, clapping, murmurs, even a few cheers that the gavel struggled to contain. Cruz leaned forward again, his jaw tight, the weight of the cameras bearing down on him. "Representative Crockett," he snapped, "I don't need a lecture on honesty from someone who's clearly more interested in scoring viral clips than addressing the issues at hand." The words came out sharp, but the delivery faltered. His voice cracked ever so slightly on viral clips, and the chamber caught it. A ripple of chuckles rolled through the audience. Cruz pretended not to hear, but his tightened grip on the microphone betrayed his irritation. Crockett waited until the laughter subsided. Then she leaned in, her tone cool, deliberate, and devastatingly clear. "Senator, I don't have to score viral clips. You hand them to me every time you interrupt and melt down on camera. The people at home see it. They're not fooled." The room erupted. Laughter, applause, even a few gasps bounced across the chamber. The gavel struck the desk again and again, calling for order, but the energy couldn't be contained. Reporters typed furiously, knowing they had just captured the night's headline moment. Cruz's face reddened, his smirk collapsing into a grimace. For the first time, he looked smaller in his chair, while Crockett sat poised and commanding, the spotlight fully hers. Cruz shuffled his papers, his movements quick and uneven, as if trying to reset the moment. He cleared his throat, forcing a measured tone. "Let's pivot back to the real issue," he said, his voice straining for calm. "This isn't about personalities. This is about policy. And if you can't separate the two, then maybe you're in the wrong room." The attempt at composure was obvious, almost rehearsed, but the chamber wasn't buying it. The air was thick with the memory of his earlier outbursts. Crockett leaned forward, clasping her hands as though she'd been waiting for him to say exactly that. "The wrong room," she repeated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Senator, the only person making this about personalities is you. 6 times you tried to silence me. 6 times you failed. That's not policy, that's panic." The words sliced through the room like a blade. Gasps followed, then a burst of applause that drowned out Cruz's sputtering attempt to respond. The moderator's gavel came down again, but order was slipping further from his grasp. Cruz froze, his mouth open but his voice lost. Cameras zoomed in mercilessly, catching every second of his stunned silence. Crockett didn't gloat, she simply sat back in her chair, calm, collected, and in complete control. Cruz's face flushed as he leaned forward again, his voice rising with a sharp edge. "Representative Crockett, let me remind you, this is my time to question, not yours to filibuster. You don't get to turn this into some performance just because you think it'll play well on social media." His words came out fast, almost tripping over each other, the frustration plain. The cameras caught the flicker of desperation in his eyes. Crockett didn't even flinch. She lifted her chin slightly, her expression calm, almost amused. When she finally spoke, her tone was steady, deliberate, and cutting. "Senator, if telling the truth sounds like a performance to you, then maybe you've been in Washington too long. Because the people watching aren't seeing a performance. They're seeing you lose control, again and again, because you can't handle facts spoken without fear." The chamber erupted. Applause thundered, mixed with laughter and gasps, while the moderator's gavel pounded helplessly. Cruz's shoulders sank, his attempt to reassert dominance had collapsed under the weight of her words. Reporters' headlines practically wrote themselves, "Crockett dismantles Cruz in his own hearing." Cruz's fingers drummed against the desk, the sound picked up faintly by the microphones. He leaned in once more, but the confidence was gone. His voice cracked slightly as he tried to recover. "Representative Crockett, your theatrics may impress some people here, but they don't impress me. If you think raising your voice and throwing insults counts as facts, then I fear for the level of discourse we've reached." It was meant to be sharp, but it landed flat. His words wavered, his delivery uneven, and the chamber knew it. A few in the audience shifted uncomfortably, but most sat in silence, waiting for Crockett's response. She didn't rush. She let the moment hang, the tension thick as a storm about to break. Then, with piercing clarity, she spoke. "Senator, I haven't raised my voice once. I haven't thrown a single insult. What you're mistaking for theatrics is simply me refusing to bow to your interruptions. Theatrics is what happens when someone blusters for cameras and hopes no one notices they've run out of arguments. The chamber roared, applause, laughter, even a few cheers bursting out before the gavel could strike. Cruz's face fell, his composure unraveling as the reality set in. Every attempt to silence her had only made her stronger. Cruz's lips parted as if he had a retort ready, but nothing came out. He shuffled his papers again, eyes darting down the desk, buying time he didn't have. The cameras zoomed in, catching every nervous flick of his hands. He finally leaned into the microphone, voice lower now, straining for composure. Representative, I just think it's unfortunate that instead of addressing serious concerns, you've chosen to make this about me. It was weak. Everyone in the chamber knew it. The words hung awkwardly, stripped of the sharp edge he once carried. Crockett pounced, her voice calm but resonant. Senator, you made this about you the moment you interrupted me 6 times. You wanted control, and now that you've lost it, you want sympathy. But the people didn't send us here for sympathy. They sent us here for truth. The room erupted again, this time louder than before. Applause thundered through the chamber, echoing across the marble walls. Reporters leaned forward, almost breathless. This wasn't just a heated exchange anymore, it was a rout. Cruz stared down at his notes, silent. The once commanding presence was shrinking before their eyes, while Crockett sat steady, every word hitting like a gavel of its own. Cruz sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, but the silence was unbearable. He had to try, anything to claw back ground. He straightened his papers, cleared his throat, and leaned forward with forced steadiness. Representative Crockett, he began, his voice thinner than before, I may not agree with your tone, but I respect your passion. Still, passion doesn't replace facts. And if you think you've somehow silenced me, you're mistaken. I'll continue asking the tough questions, whether you like it or not. It was supposed to sound resolute, but the cracks showed. His words wavered, his delivery lacked conviction. The audience picked up on it instantly. This was not the booming Cruz they were used to, this was a man trying to mask retreat as defiance. Crockett leaned into her mic, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Her reply came crisp, unshaken, and precise. Senator, no one here has tried to silence you. What's happened is much simpler, your questions collapse the moment they're answered. That isn't me ending your voice, it's your arguments ending themselves. The chamber gasped. Then, thunderous applause. Cruz's face reddened, his jaw tightening as he stared down at his notes, unable to meet her gaze. The room was boiling with anticipation. Every eye was fixed on Cruz, waiting to see if he had anything left to offer. He sat forward, gripping the microphone like a lifeline, his voice a little shaky as he spoke. Representative Crockett, he said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace, I know you enjoy these little moments. But let's not pretend your sharp words change the reality. The facts are stubborn things, and one day, they'll catch up with you. It was meant to be his big rebound, but it sounded hollow, like a man clinging to a script that no longer worked. A few people in the chamber shifted in their seats, others barely concealed their smirks. Crockett didn't hesitate. She leaned forward, her tone smooth but lethal. You're right, Senator, facts are stubborn things. And the stubborn fact tonight is this, 6 times you tried to cut me off, and 6 times you failed. The record will show it, the cameras have caught it, and the public has already judged it. The crowd stirred, applause bubbling up again, but she wasn't done. Her eyes locked on Cruz like a final warning shot. So if the facts are coming for anyone, Senator, it isn't me. The chamber erupted, laughter, applause, even cheers too loud for the gavel to contain. Cruz froze, his face tight, his voice lost. And everyone knew, the stage was set for Crockett's ultimate clapback. The chamber quieted again, though the energy still crackled in the air. Cruz sat stiffly, his lips pressed thin, desperately clinging to what little composure he had left. The cameras zoomed in on his face, every viewer at home waiting to see if he'd try again. But Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her tone calm, deliberate, and final. "Senator," she said, each word crisp and unshakable, "you can interrupt me 6 times, you can raise your voice, you can shuffle your papers, but you can't outrun the truth. And tonight, the truth ended you before I even had to." The chamber exploded. Applause thundered, reporters jumped on their keyboards, and social media lit up within seconds. Hashtags began trending instantly, hashtag Crockett Clapback and hashtag Cruz shutdown. Cruz sat frozen, eyes fixed on his notes, unable to speak. The gavel hammered for order, but it didn't matter, the viral moment was sealed. Crockett leaned back in her chair, calm, collected, and untouchable. The fight was over, and everyone knew who had won.